Thank you, and hello, Abilene. Happy Mother's Day to all those it applies. To those who it does not apply, thank you for joining us today as well. This, for me, is a sort of homecoming with the series. It is in these back hallways, as I walked with William and Samantha, that the First Lady's man was actually born. The idea had been percolating in season one, the 1700s and 1800s, where I did work with Pam down in St. Louis at the Whitehaven Plantation, the Grant National Historic Site. I had ideas, I had visions, but they didn't come clear until I literally walked in here and around the back and through the windows and saw an easel. And on the easel was a promotion for an upcoming speaker. And I said to Samantha, let's say I put something like that together. Is my story, are my adventures the type of thing that you would invite here to share with others? And she said, absolutely, it's 100%. So in Volume 2, and in parts of Volume 1, and here today, and when I was here in 2014, I have no trouble reiterating how special Abilene is and how nice it was to pull off onto KS-15 and past the Sonic and the Pizza Hut and all the places that I knew so well from my travels to join my friends and people who I consider family here in Abilene. So sincerely, thank you for having me back. Now consider this. Abilene, Kansas. Abilene, Kansas would not be Abilene, Kansas. In fact, the United States of America would not be the United States of America if George Washington had not married Martha Dandridge Custis. America would not be a country if George Washington married any other woman. I know everyone in the room is familiar with the phrase, behind every great man is an even greater woman. It has never been more true than the beginning of our country. And here's why. George Washington was not Martha's first husband. Does this surprise anyone? Did anyone not know this? I was not blatantly aware of this. Even coming from Washington, D.C., my 5th grade trip was to Colonial Williamsburg, where you do learn a considerable amount about these early women and George Washington and Martha Custis. But it's not on the front of our brain. It is not what we think of when we think of Martha Washington. And here's how the whole timeline goes and why it's so important. Martha Dandridge was a young woman in Colonial Williamsburg and wanted to marry Daniel Parke Custis. Daniel Parke Custis went to his father and said, I'm going to marry Martha Dandridge. His father said, no, you are not. He said, but Dad, I love her. He said, I'm sure you do, but she's not of the same social standing. The wedding will not take place. It's the end of the subject. He said, meet her. Talk to her. You will love her as I do, and you will want me to marry her. You'll want this marriage to go through. Fine. He was intending to say no, but he changed his mind. Martha Dandridge was unusual for her time. Homeschooled, maybe not the poorest girl in town, but certainly not the most wealthy girl in town. The wedding goes through. Martha Dandridge Custis. Then Custis dies. Leaves her a widow at the age of 26 with 4 children, 2 of whom lived to young adulthood, but not past that. The children we see in paintings, portraits, etchings of the Washingtons are Martha's grandchildren from her first marriage. But more importantly, Custis left her uber wealthy. She was in charge of over 8,000 productive tobacco acres, about a quarter of the real estate in Williamsburg, and in cash on hand in the house, she had 3 to 4 times the Virginia state governor's salary in silver. And if you look back at pictures that have been recreated digitally, constructing with computer programs and stuff, you will see Martha Dandridge Custis was hot. I'm here to tell you, she was a good-looking lady. She's young, she's attractive, she's wealthy, and here's the thing to consider. Martha Dandridge Custis was essentially our first colonial female CEO. Right? Some people thinking about that. Wheels are turning. Being a housewife, being a mother, especially today when we celebrate that, there's almost no other important job. Back then, it was even more. You were running the family business, the corporation. You're how the family clothed themselves, how you grew the cotton to make the clothes that would clothe yourself, the animals that would feed you, the crops that would feed you. At 26 years old, Martha Dandridge Custis is doing this when she meets George Washington. If I'm George Washington, heck yeah, I'm marrying this woman. She's the most eligible widow in the colonies. Now, let's say things went differently. Let's play Back to the Future. Everyone know that movie, right? You go back and you mix around the puzzle pieces and you change things. Some people call it the butterfly effect. Let's say George marries Mary Smith down the street. Let's say Mary Smith's got some cash and some privilege too, some social standing. But she can't run that. She doesn't have the wherewithal, the aptitude, the fortitude to run that business, that corporation like Martha Dandridge Custis did. George Washington can't get on his horse and run up and down the East Coast fighting the redcoats. If he marries anyone other than Martha Dandridge Custis, we're not America. No America. World War I looks a little bit different. World War II looks a little bit different. Things near and dear to my heart: Harley-Davidson motorcycles, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Apple computers. Folks, this stuff does not happen if George Washington doesn't marry Martha Dandridge Custis. These women are such an equal partner, a necessary partner in the creation, formation, success, and continuation of the United States. It is beyond belief. And it happens at every stage of the game. My name is Andrew Oak. I'm called the First Lady's Man. Because for C-SPAN, I traveled to nearly every home, library, church, train station, general store, plantation, farm, school, cemetery, birthplace, every First Lady, Martha Washington, through now Melania Trump. I found these women to be unusual for their time. Not just unusual for other women, but men, children, and everyone. Without these women, we would not be America. Without America, the modern world looks very, very different. The series was called Influence and Image. Influence. That's a tough one for a television producer to put on camera. How do you do that? What is influence? How do you visually portray that? Well, trip number 2 was to Quincy, Massachusetts, where I got to know Abigail and our first foreign-born First Lady, Louisa Catherine Adams. The Massachusetts Historical Society has 70,000 pages of Adams family correspondence. And I got to look through it. I had white gloves on. I was behind a gated, locked fence, and there was a man much larger than me, which is not difficult to do, who looked very official, making sure that everything was going the way it was and should have been, which I'm happy about. But I got to hold letters, and I got to read influence. And I got to learn things about these First Ladies, the Adamses, that I was not taught in school. When George Washington decided not to run for president for a third term, he announced it. He told his vice president, John Adams, and John Adams did what he always did. He wrote home to ask his wife what he should do. The first vice president of the United States, second president of the United States, in the 1790s, early 1800s, writes home to say, honey, Washington's not running. What should I do? And I held the letter of her response. And she said, if you're asking me if you should run for president, she had flowery language of the day. It was something to the effect of, God will guide your hand and your heart. You will figure that out on your own. But if you are asking whether you should run for another term as vice president, on that I will answer. And she answered very clearly. She said, I will serve under no man other than George Washington. Let's think about that. Put that into modern terms. She basically said, come home president or just come home. And he came home president. There's a very famous phrase that is associated with Abigail Adams. Many of you in the room probably know it. Remember the ladies. We hear it often. Remember the ladies. That's a bold statement for that time. That's a bold statement for this time. That's a bold statement. What a lot of people don't know are the words that surround that in the letter. I know the words that surround it because I've held the letter. Remember the ladies, for when you have them in your favor, the men will be on your side. There's already people laughing because you get it. I didn't get it at first. I might not even have gotten it in volume 1. I got it by volume 2. I get it now. Remember the ladies, for when you have them in your favor, the men will be on your side. In your homes, for the most part, you're sitting in your living rooms, as I do in Shadyside, Maryland, in front of my big TV that's smarter than me. Who's holding the remote? You're right. I'm holding the remote. I'm the man. I bought that TV. I hold that remote. I hold that power. You think I'm picking the shows? Abigail Adams knew in the late 1700s, before electricity and hundreds of years before women would have the right to vote, that men were holding the remotes and women were picking the shows. Pit bulls and parolees isn't my pick, but I watch it. Let's say Colonial Andy comes home. Colonial Heather, my significant other, is waiting on the couch. She says, the election's tomorrow. Who you voting for? Well, I say, well, I was thinking about voting for John Adams. She goes, well, that's dumb. Colonial Andy stops to think. Is that dumb? Am I dumb? Flip this coin. Colonial Andy comes home and says, the election's tomorrow and I'm voting for John Adams. And Colonial Heather says, you're a smart man. I say, yes, I am. I'm a smart man because my wife said so. I'm a smart man. Remember the ladies, the men will be in your favor. Abigail Adams knew it in the late 1700s. Her writings, her work with gender, religion, civil rights are progressive thinking for today. Influence and image. Image is an easy one, right? We're looking at images. What is the number one thing you think of when you think of first ladies? An article, a physical thing you can touch, use, whatever. Just yell it out. Yeah, there it is. Number one answer. Number one answer. If we're playing Family Feud, gowns is the number one answer. 95% of the people in 95% of the rooms, in 95% of the speeches, the first thing out of someone's mouth, dresses. Do you know where the first inaugural dress came from? I did not. Most people don't. Growing up outside of Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian was my playground, was every field trip, was every relative's visit, we would go down there. When I went for the series, I went through the special entrance, past the coded doors, the Indiana Jones special cool rooms. And my host there, Lisa Kathleen Grady, said, well, you've seen the dresses outside. We should probably show you the first. Yes, please. Now I'm thinking, Martha Washington, Abigail Adams, one of the Roosevelts, who know, you know? Helen Taft. Helen Taft donated the first inaugural gown. Helen Taft, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, because we're not in Ohio, and I did make this mistake in Ohio, but I will say that most of you in the room, if you were naming 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 first ladies, Helen Taft wouldn't be one of them. Is that a fair assumption? Well, like I say, I'm not in Ohio, because I did say that when I was speaking at the Hayes Presidential Library Museum, and a very nice lady in the back of the room went, "You're in Ohio." And I said, okay, fair point. And she's from Cincinnati. I knew that. I knew Helen Taft was from Cincinnati. Just forgot what room I was speaking in. But most people would not think of Helen Taft. Two socialite women in Washington, D.C. were putting together the first ladies exhibit, and Helen Taft was the sitting first lady. They went to her and said, Mrs. Taft, we can't have a first ladies exhibit without something from the sitting first lady. Anything, your pick, dealer's choice. She could have picked anything. It could have been shoes. It could have been a handbook, handbag, purse. It could have been jewelry. But ladies in the room, you will know, similar to homecoming or the prom or your wedding, if they've seen you in it once, the dress is pretty much dead to you, right? So she wore the inaugural gown, and everyone saw her in it. And she said, here, take this. I'm done with this. Thus starting the tradition, and now, retroactively and moving forward, we have a dress to represent, whether inaugural gown or not, because not everyone has an inauguration, or a celebration, or a gown, or a dance or ball. Certainly before they even had them, we have a dress to represent every first lady because of Helen Taft. How many people in the room have been to D.C.? Okay, excellent. Did you see the cherry blossom trees when you were there, by any chance? Yeah, wonderful. People come from around the world. I've been in bands that have played the Cherry Blossom Festival. Again, grew up outside of Washington, D.C. When you were there and saw the cherry blossoms, did you think to thank Helen Taft for them? Because you should have. She planted the first one. Helen Taft wanted nothing more than to marry a president. And here's why. How many of you in the room, over the years of your youth and childhood, were sent away to camp or a relative's house on spring break, summer break, because your parents needed a break? I was sent away a lot. Well, so was young Nellie Herron, Helen Herron. Except when she was sent to her family friend's house, she was sent to her father's former law partner. Her father's former law partner was President Rutherford B. Hayes. So that's where Nellie got to spend her spring break, walking up and down the halls of the White House saying, I could get used to this. I want to come back here someday. So when her husband wanted to become nothing more than a Supreme Court justice, which he had a deal with McKinley. President McKinley said, go to the Philippines, fix that mess in the Philippines for me, you come back, and you got a seat on the Supreme Court. We all know what happened to McKinley. The deal died with him. When he came back and Theodore Roosevelt decided not to run, and then became Theodore Roosevelt and decided to run again and make his own party and do things his own way, which is respectable in its own right, Helen Taft was the first one to say, my husband's ready, look what he did with the Philippines. And that's where she saw all these beautiful riverside parks and things. So when it came time to clean up D.C., we know D.C. is built on a swamp, right? The tidal basin around where the cherry blossoms are all planted was a swamp with a dirt roadway. I think motor cars went by at a roaring 15 miles per hour, throwing mud everywhere. But it was time to clean it up. Helen Taft arranged to have cherry blossoms sent over from Japan and planted, and thus there they are. And some of the original ones are still there. I've walked around that tidal basin, I don't even know how many times. It could be 10,000 times in my life. And I never thought, well, Helen Taft did this. Helen Taft also, when her husband did win the presidency, and as the tradition was, the outgoing president would ride in the carriage from the Capitol to the White House as sort of a, the peaceful transfer of power that we celebrate here in the United States so often. That was the tradition, that the outgoing president would say, hey, nice job, buddy. Well, because Theodore Roosevelt decided to be Theodore Roosevelt and say, no, I do want to be president, changed my mind and I'm running, and then didn't win, he goes, there's no way I'm getting in that carriage with that guy. He took my job and my house. So there's an empty seat. Who do you think the first lady to ride in the carriage with her husband was? Helen Taft. She loved D.C. so much, she's also the first lady of only two, to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Can anyone name the other? Jackie Kennedy. Very good. From here on out, if you don't know the answer, say Kennedy or Roosevelt, and the odds will be in your favor. That's Cliff Notes. That's special because it's Mother's Day. I don't tell every audience that. But yes, Helen Taft is the first of two first ladies to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery, where she stays with her husband, who did become a Supreme Court justice after the presidency, the only president to do so. So I think everyone got what they wanted there. Today is Mother's Day. Tomorrow's Mother's Day. Tomorrow's Mother's Day. We're celebrating Mother's Day today. So I want to talk about some mothers, and these are the two things that I want to cover today. Mothers and Mamie. Mamie's also a mother, but I know we're not in Ohio. I'll leave it at that. So we're going to talk about Mamie in a minute. But more of the footprint that these women, who we would not name, 5, 10, 15, 20, put on our modern world that we don't know or give that proper recognition to. Most people in the room, myself included, when you say Roosevelt, you think Eleanor. Exactly. There's another Roosevelt. There's another highly influential and significant Roosevelt. We're going back in time one administration, but Edith Roosevelt. When Edith Roosevelt got to the White House, it was like the circus had come to D.C. 6 kids, 7 if you include Theodore, which I do, and a cavalcade of animals and activity that the country needed and wanted. In Oyster Bay at Sagamore Hill, the Roosevelt National Historic Site, they have a large rendition of a New Yorker magazine cover. Santa Claus coming down the chimney of the White House with a sack full of presents, and it says, presents. Sack full of presents. And it says, there's life in the old house yet. The McKinley administration was interesting and a whole nother study and woman and circumstances of their own, but it was not an active White House. We'll leave it at that for now. The Roosevelt White House was an active White House. So active that before President Theodore Roosevelt took an audience with, I believe, the Japanese Prime Minister, young Ethel came running into his office, the Oval Office, and said, "Dad, Dad, the boys are going to feed the guinea pig to the hyena." And the funny thing is that there was a hyena in the White House to feed the guinea pig too. So Roosevelt took that guinea pig and said, "There, Ethel," stuck it in his pocket, and the guinea pig slept in Roosevelt's pocket throughout the whole meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister, to which he returned it. We know this because Ethel Roosevelt preserved a lot of that family history. The Roosevelts all wore little red leather baby booties, and they've got fine examples of those there. And books. How many people had Pat the Bunny when they were a kid? Roosevelt's had it in French. Fancy, fancy. But Ethel helped preserve that. These family members helped preserve these things, and that was such a large family. But the Roosevelts had the same issue that we're dealing with today with public and access to the children. They work for us, presidents, and thus we think their families belong to us because we pay their salaries, we elect them, put them in the people's house. Things over the years, especially coming off of an administration where there was an assassination, security was an issue. People wanted access to this large active family, especially after the McKinley years of not having children in the White House. So what Edith did was very smart. She took all the kids, got them dressed up in their Sunday best, and hired one of the top photographers, and they have all these photographs. They said, "Go outside with your favorite pet, stand in front of your favorite tree, climb your tree, what have you, and we'll take pictures." And she took pictures after pictures after pictures. There's albums and albums and albums now. You can Google this stuff. It was in all of the top magazines of the day. But she would release them periodically. So the public thought they were getting access to these children, but she was still keeping them safe. She was controlling it. It's kind of like Facebook or Instagram or social media of the day. She was releasing these pictures when she wanted to give the public what they wanted. She was protecting her children. This role of First Lady is a difficult role because, as most of the folks in the room today know, being a mom is hard. Being a mom and being a First Lady is even more difficult. The public eye is tough. And I don't think anyone understands that better than the Eisenhowers. There's two things that I learned here. Well, I learned way more than two things. Two very significant things that all have to do with, in my opinion, the most remarkable two collections that you have here with regards to Mamie. One deals with image, and the other deals with influence. How about that? Image. The Mamie Bangs. I was shown here clip-on Mamie Bangs that women could buy in drugstores. Now today, whenever I make a social media post, a historical on this day that relates to Mamie, and I put up a picture of Mamie, everyone always gets on her hair and this, that, and the other and everything. It's an unusual look, so much so that she had her stylist create a how-to booklet that is still on display here. It's still on display here to show people at this famous salon how to do this, to duplicate this, not only for Mamie, but for walking in and say, "Hey, I'll have the Mamie, please." And there you get it. Or you'd buy your clip-ons at the drugstore. This was a look that was created out of two people, very public people, that had a tragedy and had to deal with that tragedy in the public eye, as many of these women do. They lost their son, Icky, at the age of 3, and it almost tore apart their marriage. This was a spice up things. This was a make a change. This is a new beginning. And it turns into a trademark look that is then duplicated for women around the world, and they don't even know why. Not only do we change the way we eat, change the way we exercise, we change the way we look because of these women. That's the influence they have. Mamie Pink. I will go to the mat on this and say that Dwight D. Eisenhower is the only president to be photographed sleeping in pink satin sheets. And he did it like a boss, did he not? Even though we know who the boss was, right? Mamie. Mamie and Dwight are the opposite of George and Martha. No, switch that. I'm trying to figure it out in my head. They're the mirror of Dwight married up, is what I'm clumsily trying to get at here. So in the same way that George Washington married up, but Mamie took a step back from privilege to give this life on the road, entertaining, which she loved to do. Which brings me to the first part of Mamie in my mind, which is image, as we talked about her haircut. There was no more extensive collection of clothes in my entire travels, pinballing for a year and 2 months across the country to all of these locations. No one had more clothes than Mamie. And she wore them well. She had shoes, she had hats, she had sleeveless dresses because apparently Ike liked her arms. Said she had beautiful arms. She was time appropriate, she was age appropriate, she was used to the public eye, but this is where Mamie became real to me. At nearly every site that I traveled to, I would talk on the phone first, get a little pre-interview, we call it in the business, about what was in store for me, because I'd never been to Abilene before. And William kept telling me, we've got these bed coats. We've got endless bed coats. And I'd heard things, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, it's not like he's speaking Russian. I get it, bed coat, but what's, okay, he's got bed coats. This dude's freaking out over these bed coats. What are they? And earlier, going way back to my first trip through Virginia, Scott Harris at the Frederick Monroe Library was freaking out over some hair earrings. And I'm like, dude, all right, we'll see the hair earrings. And then I get there, and it's earrings made out of hair. Well, it's different times, folks. We can't. In the 1700s, it was a term of endearment. You would have had quite a different reaction if someone had given you hair earrings in the 1700s. But I digress. We're in the modern times. Volume 2. Focus. So when I get here and I look at these bed coats, I get it. Mamie had heart issues. She was told by her doctor, you can't work 5 days a week. Your heart can't take it. Mamie wasn't going to take a day off. It's just the kind of lady she was. So she said, we'll start each day a little bit later. But I'm going to need to have my staff meetings in my bedroom if I'm not going to get out of bed till 11 o'clock or noon each day to rest my heart. But people will come to me, and I need to look presentable. So she's got these fantastic bed coats with boas and sequins and pinks, and they're glorious. But that's not what made her human to me. What made her human was the work she did and the evidence we have of that work, what she did. Not just her daily schedule and things that you would imagine from a first lady. But there are catalogs. They're here in the library. Just like I did and probably everyone else in this room did around Christmas time, those catalogs came and you circled the G.I. Joe or the Barbie Dream Home or whatever it was you wanted that Christmas. Well, that's what her grandchildren did. 4, I believe. 4 grandchildren? 4 grandchildren that she was very, very close with, and she was a good grandma. Because just because she's first lady doesn't mean she's not wife, mother, grandmother, human being. And there's little notes. Susie wants a Slinky. Mikey wants a puppy. All the stuff, and it's circled in things. I did that to create my letter to Santa. And they become real. They step out of the pages of history books, off of the oil paintings, and they become real people. Influence. When Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected president for the first time, there had never been that many women that voted, and clearly made the right choice, in my opinion, in an election and voted for Eisenhower. I like Mamie. Right here. And during the elections, I would have been the majority wearing this pin. I would have been the electorate majority. Over the course of our history, women have entered into politics, the political arena. First ladies have been marketed as this other, but never the way Mamie did. And she went in with gusto, like everything else that she did. There are I like Ike, I like Mamie stockings that go with your I like Ike Mamie dress, which go with your I like Mamie gloves, that you hold your comb when you lift off your I like Mamie hat. I mean, it's craziness. And here in Abilene, at this facility, within walking distance, there are drawers and pages and boxes of this stuff and pictures of Ike with women all dressed in I like dresses. I like Ike dresses. If someone had if I was pictured with 20 women and they all had I like the First Ladies man dresses, it'd be up in every room in my house. That'd be fantastic. That would be absolutely fantastic. Mamie helped elect her husband in a way that no other First Lady had done. Not all First Ladies like politics. Some First Ladies love living in the White House. Some First Ladies never moved into the White House. And think about the way we think of this stuff in modern times. It's interesting. Almost as interesting as how influential women have been over the years is how differently we treat each First Lady in the same circumstances. What's good for one is not good for another. What's bad for one is not bad for another. I'm often asked, and we'll do some question and answer here in a minute, but I'll save you one of the questions. Who's your favorite First Lady, Andy? It's like picking a favorite pet. It's like picking a favorite kid. You can't do it. You can't do it. But I will tell you who I think, in my extensive travel and research, is the most influential First Lady, past, present, or future. Anyone want to take a stab? All right, fair enough. You guys got me. Sadly, no. She's a close second. I'll give you that. How about? But who is the most influential First Lady, past, present, or future? See, Eleanor Roosevelt. There's my favorite right now because she was listening. I said, if you don't know, say Roosevelt or Kennedy. And she was listening. She said Roosevelt. Unfortunately, that's the stumper. It's not. It's neither of them. So I kind of fooled you on that one. So I'm sorry. It's like, this should be an April Fool's speech, not a Mother's Day speech. But you were paying attention, and I appreciate that from you. Betty Ford. Now some people are saying no kidding. Some people are nodding. Some people are puzzled. It took me writing Volume 2, doing a little bit outside of my research, my personal research and travels, to discover a fact about Betty Ford. Betty Ford has indirectly or directly affected every human being on planet Earth, because there is no human being that I have met, and I get around, no human being that I've met that has escaped cancer and or addiction. That human being doesn't exist. We can look back to some of the Adamses' children and one of their daughters got a mastectomy in the 1800s. I can't even imagine. There would not be cancer walks, 5Ks, rehab centers, open public discussions, AA, NA, any of these help groups and support groups and the study and research that we put into it, had someone not been first to bring it out of the back rooms and talk about it. It's Betty Ford. And here's the crazy thing about that. Betty Ford, more than any other first lady, should not have been first lady. Not because she didn't want it, which she didn't, but because her husband never should have been president. In the sense that he was appointed when Nixon retired. But, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that, Michael. That's a good one. I feel like Rich Little up here. Well, there's one. That'll date me. But more importantly than not being president, and this is the part I learned, he shouldn't have been vice president. Agnew retired, and he was appointed vice president. So this first lady, given the platform of the office of first lady, changes the world for every human being when she shouldn't even have been in the office that led to the office that he shouldn't have had. Then I went to Flint, Michigan. Grand Rapids is where the museum is. The Fords are a little weird. They got the museum in one place and the library in the other, and that's fine. That's wonderful. Betty became real. Betty Bloomer was a dancer, a music fan. We all know the picture of her up on the table in the White House doing that dance before she moved out. But what they showed me in Grand Rapids was something that I could relate to, just like the catalog here in Abilene. She kept her records in a leather-bound album, 78s. My Uncle Max had a Wurlitzer 78 jukebox in his house. Christmas, Thanksgiving, man, we just plunk our money in there and just play 78s all day. Benny Goodman, all the 78s that Betty Ford would have danced to when she was away at dance school and living in group houses in New York with performers. But when you look through this, and I can still smell and feel the brown, it's almost like a grocery sack brown, that envelope. People are nodding. They know this. They know that. And it has like that, it's just a warm, home-cooked, kind of neat, nostalgic smell to it, where she kept her records. And on each of the sleeves, this is where I didn't know I had so much in common with Betty Ford. But she wrote notes about the songs and the song titles, and they're in careful handwriting. I can't tell you, by the time I was allowed to touch my parents' stereo, and I had money from mowing the lawn, and I would go out and get my Maxell blank tapes at Peaches Records, and I would carefully write in the hand font of every single logo of every band, and carefully write all my song titles on all my mixtapes that I kept in my little lunchbox that I traveled around in. That's Betty Ford. That's what she's doing. She even had notes to her roommates, like I did in college, said, "Can you please put the right record back in the right sleeve?" Betty Ford's human. One of the most human in all of First Lady history. Because she also came out and said publicly multiple times on 60 Minutes things that did not help her husband's presidential career. And after they retired, after they left the White House, President Ford said, most of the time I more agreed with her than not, but even if I didn't, it wouldn't have mattered. She would have said it. She said, if they don't like me, they can throw me out. On 60 Minutes in the 70s. These are the most powerful and influential, unpaid, and unelected women in the world. Just by nature of who they marry, who then happens to run for president, who then happens to win the presidency, and then move into the White House. We expect so much, we criticize their every move, we celebrate their victories, but it's a relatively thankless job to be the mother of the country, and sometimes the mother of the world. They've been part of the equation and equal partners from the very beginning. Moving forward with women empowerment, women leadership, roles in modern society, we're not letting anyone new in the room. Women have been there the whole time. We just need to turn around and say, what do you got? Because when we move forward together, not as men or women, but as human beings, trying to take a page from the First Lady's playbook, to just do things because it's the right thing to do. We're not getting paid for it. We're not expected to do it. We're doing it because it's cool. It's the right thing to do. It's the way to move forward. It's the way to make a better world for everybody, simply by recognizing an equal partner that's always been in the room with us since the beginning. That's America. That's us. These are our First Ladies. I'm your First Lady's man. Thank you for your attention. Happy Mother's Day. And I'd love to take your questions.